Hi there, Rebecca here from laughsewcreate. In today's video, I will be sharing with you some tips and tricks for working with clear vinyl. The goal of this video is to get you jump started on some fun projects without having the headache of trying to figure it all out. In the description down below, I will link a checklist, quick tip, handout. It's a great thing to review prior to starting with your projects. So first I want to show you some of the projects that I've made with clear vinyl, just to show you the wide range of fun things that you can make. So you can use the clear vinyl as accent windows. You can also make supply holders for your sewing room. I made one with the leftovers from some of these projects to hold the clover clips. The materials are inexpensive, which brings me to where you can purchase some of these supplies. You can go to general fabric supplies online or at the store, Joann's Fabrics. Some cost-saving tips. Not that vinyl's that expensive, but if you don't happen to have a store nearby where there's vinyl readily accessible, you can use the vinyl that comes on your bed sheets or like your blankets. This is a thicker vinyl, so it's fun to use for projects. You can also use tablecloths, a shower curtain in a pinch. Just be sure to check out the weight of the shower curtain. They make anything from a light type of vinyl to a heavier type of vinyl. So there are three things to consider. What is the type of vinyl that you're going to need for your project? For instance, do you need something that is sturdier? So if you're making some of the clear bins, you may want to pick out a heavier vinyl than, say, if you were just going to make a zip pouch. Are you going to use it as a shoulder tote? I know some of the sports arena events require that you bring clear vinyl bags into the events or venue, and so you may want to do something that's a little bit sturdier for that kind of event. Second thing to consider is, going along with the first one, is gauge. So vinyl comes in a variety of gauges, and you can find gauges from 8 all the way to 20. If you're using a domestic machine or a semi-industrial machine, you're probably not going to use the whole range. The gauge, the lower the number, the thinner the vinyl material, the higher the number, the thicker the gauge.
Also know that some of the thinner
vinyl may become easier to tear once it's punctured with your stitches, and also it may have a more wrinkly appearance than, say, versus a 16 gauge vinyl that is much thicker and more sturdy. It's really kind of hard to wrinkle up, because if you go too thick, then it may be too difficult for your sewing machine to handle it. When you purchase the clear vinyl, it will come usually on the long bolts, and you'll have to have them cut it. And it comes wrapped in this tissue paper. And don't throw that tissue paper away, because I have a tip for you in a few minutes. Okay, and just a quick tip, a fun tip, is to think of the story of the three little bears. You know, when they're talking about the porridge. One's too hot, one's too cold, and one is just right. You want the just right gauge of vinyl for your project. Okay, the third thing is to consider, what is the kind of style that you're going for? Do you want to make a gift for somebody that is a hobby enthusiast? So you can find vinyls in a wide variety of printed designs on it. So moving on to cutting your vinyl. There are two options here for cutting your vinyl. So the first option is to use scissors. Now, this is not the recommended option I would pick, especially if you're starting out. The reason being is that if you are cutting your vinyl, you'll get a lot of jagged edges, and it's kind of hard to get a straight clear line. Also, over time, if you don't use utility scissors and you use your fabric scissors, it could dull your fabric scissors. So some tips if you are going to be using scissors would be to take the longest cuts possible. In other words, you don't want a lot of short little cuts, but you want to try to get nice long cuts to make a smoother edge. The other thing is that vinyl tends to shift around and move, so if you have a rotary cutter and mat, it makes it and ruler, it makes it easier to hold the vinyl in place to cut the right amount of vinyl. And you can also use, here's a tip, you can also use washi tape or painter's tape or even masking tape to hold the vinyl in place while you get it situated on your mat, and so that you can get all your angles correctly and get some straight lines. One tip is if you're using clear vinyl and you're having a hard time seeing the measurements on the mat, you could also cut out your pattern piece out of tissue paper and then use that underneath, lay your clear vinyl on top, place some washi tape to kind of secure everything, and then cut your pattern out. Moving on to how to remove the wrinkles out of your vinyl. If you know you've had it folded up for some time, or if you're working with it and you've turned the bag, don't worry, it's an easy fix. So some ideas you can do is put your vinyl outside where it's nice and warm, let the sunshine take the wrinkles out. A quicker method is to use your iron on an ironing board, warming up the surface, taking your piece of vinyl and rubbing it on the ironing board to release some of those wrinkles. What you don't want to do is have the iron directly contact the vinyl because it will melt your vinyl in no time. One of my preferred methods is using a hairdryer, and the reason being is because a hairdryer can kind of get inside of your project and warm it up so that you can flip it easily and poke out the corners easily. When you're using a hairdryer or iron, you want to use like a medium setting. You don't want to go too hot and you don't want to get too close to the vinyl because it could melt or weaken your vinyl. Okay, moving on to the type of thread that you want to use with vinyl. Found that the 100% polyester is nice and strong, and the added bonus of using polyester thread is that if you have the little thread ends when you're sewing, you can quickly run a lighter over it and it kind of singes the polyester thread down, or you can use scissors to cut your ends. Just if you're putting a flame to it, you just want to do it really quickly. Okay, now moving on to the sewing machine needle. What type of needle do you need to use? I've had success with a universal 80-12. Make sure that you have a newer needle in there and that it's not dull. You could use a vinyl, denim, or jean needle if you're using some of the heavier fabrics and you just want to make sure that it's not going to break on you. The big key here is to just test it on a small piece of your vinyl to make sure that you're getting the stitch quality that you like and that your needle isn't going to break. Sometimes I just use a sharp needle because that way it's just puncturing and leaving small holes in the vinyl. As far as the stitch length, really important to lengthen your stitch length to, like, say a 3.0. So it's a little bit longer than a regular sewing stitch. The reason you want to have a higher is because you want the needle to puncture the vinyl and get a nice run of stitches without getting a lot of little punctures, because the more punctures that you get in the vinyl, the easier it is to rip, or it kind of weakens the seam of the vinyl. Using a little bit of a longer stitch length also helps feed the vinyl through and get a nice smooth stitch length. Now, you may be wondering about types of feet to use on vinyl. There are Teflon foots that you can get for your sewing machine. They're generally like a white foot, and the Teflon helps glide along the vinyl so it doesn't stitch and get hung up and cause uneven stitches. If you don't have that, you can use a piece of Scotch tape and tape it to the bottom of your sewing foot, and you can just trim off the sides and just trim the middle where your needle is going to pass through, and that will help the foot glide. I've also read that you could use a walking foot. I have not tried that. And then the other thing, your vinyl, especially if you're working with larger pieces of vinyl, it may have the tendency to stick on the bed of your sewing machine or even to your metal throat plate. And what you want to do there is to try to have a buffer between your vinyl and the bed of the sewing machine. What I found, and this is where your tissue paper comes in handy that you get with your vinyl. You can just fold up a piece of tissue paper and slide it on the bed of your machine between the vinyl and the bed of your machine to help the project slide through smoothly. Now, I've also found that the clear chopping mats that you can get from the Dollar Tree or anywhere really, it helps the vinyl move through without it getting stuck. Big thing is you don't want to sew over the chopping mat. You can sew over the tissue and just rip the tissue off the back of the vinyl when you're done with your project. Okay, so how to secure your project. The best way is to use clover clip because they don't leave the puncture mark like pins do. Now, if you're using pins on the edge where it may be covered up with like a fabric or a binding, so you could use pins if you wanted to in a pinch if you are going to have those pinholes hidden by a binding or a piece of fabric. But I generally just find that the clips are better, and I like it better because you're getting it to hold thicker pieces of fabric together over pins, which may be a challenge to use through some of the thicker vinyl. Plus, you don't have to worry about it weakening your vinyl, creating extra puncture holes that won't come out like they would out of cotton fabric if you were pinning a piece of cotton fabric. Okay, so I hope that these tips help you be successful and get you started quickly on some fun projects. If you found some tips that I haven't included in this video, please feel free to drop them in the comments below in our sewing community. I'm sure we'd appreciate it. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and click subscribe to see more videos like this. Don't forget the handout that I'm including below and feel free to share it with your sewing friends. Bye for now and happy sewing.